I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
So this is our, I think, biannual, isn't that right? Maybe like ambitiously quarterly farm report, where we're checking in with Spencer and Emily, who run the JPII Catholic Worker Farm. That's short for John Paul II Catholic Worker Farm in Kansas City, Missouri. And of course, they're both very active in the Morin Academy. In fact, Emily runs the newsletter and a lot of the inner workings of the Morin Academy. And Spencer provides, I don't know, classes. That's right. You do classes. I'm just kidding you. So yeah, I thought it would be kind of a nice idea to let people in on what it's like to try to run a small organic urban farm. And last time I checked in with you was about what, a half a year ago.
I think so.
Yeah. And there was some good news and some bad news, and we talked a little bit about like struggling a bit because the economics are not real promising for this type of endeavor. But I don't know. I just first of all, maybe you could just tell folks kind of like what the latest highlights are, and what's been happening there, and then we could get into some of the challenges and maybe some of the ways that being a Catholic worker farm in particular has kind of changed things for you guys. So like what's been up lately?
Well, most recently we have two twin lambs now, or a set of twin lambs from our sheep. That's been like this week that's happened. But I guess since like we last talked, yeah, we've acquired a lot more livestock, like a goat, a sheep, another dog,
More chicken.
more chickens. We came to the conclusion that the animals have produced more than we grew vegetables this year, which I think was kind of an alarming, not in a bad way, but just you can produce a lot more eggs than you can grow vegetables whenever you have that running in a good system.
Yeah.
As well as we quit our greenhouse job with the urban farming guys.
Yeah.
So
right.
our ability to produce food produce vegetables has gone down a lot, losing that field in the greenhouse.
Mm-hmm. So eggs, what do you like? Also cull some of the chickens and get some meat, or like what else do you do with the animals?
I mean, we've only killed a few chickens that have been like problem makers, like hurting other chickens or eating eggs. So I don't know. It's not that we never would. Like we found out one of our chickens, now that he's grown up, is a rooster. So if he keeps making too much noise, we'll probably end up eating him. Which I think if he starts making more noise than the ducks are like the line.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so
that also happened like this last week. Started hearing like the first signs of a crow. Like that's definitely a rooster.
Oh yeah, they're loud. And now if he starts to become active, so to speak, will it be difficult to tell like the fertilized eggs from the unfertilized eggs, or like how does that change things?
It doesn't really. I mean, you can eat fertilized eggs. People do it all the time. They just don't know.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Because it's by the time you're eating it, it's not like it's actually formed a little chicken.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll look forward to hearing that cock-a-doodle-doo next time I'm there, if he's still alive.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got all these animals, and how does that work as far as do you have kind of a system for using them and feeding them? I mean, how does that work?
I mean, right now we have two paddocks where the chicken and the poultry are, and then another paddock where the goat and the sheep are. And the goal is to fence in at least one more paddock next year and maybe two. Since we have three, since there's three houses here, we could do three backyards. And the
Mhm.
goal, if we were to have four paddocks, is that we could always have a paddock that's like recovering from being eaten and torn up by the livestock. One where they're in and they're eating, and then another one that's just kind of like recovering. If we put down a cover crop and get that to germinate, then we can be rotating like a lot of um, organic livestock people do. There's a whole game of ultimately what you're doing is you're taking care of the soil by moving the livestock around. So
Mhm.
we would like to be able to do more of that, but for this year, it's been enough work to get the two paddocks and the livestock situated.
Right. I'm sort of sponsoring the third paddock in lieu of another donor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm excited about that. Maybe we can get it up next year and get it going for you so that you've got even more space. And like ultimately what would I know folks are probably wondering like ultimately what's the vision? Like uh, other than, of course, like you said, fertilizing the land, making it a little bit more rich, which it definitely needs there, I think, in Kansas City. Anything else that you're going to do with the animals?
Continuing to incorporate them in what we do. Hopefully we can use more electric fencing too, like in the off seasons of when we're growing in the garden area, like to let the chickens pick off any of like the excess vegetables that we didn't harvest or anything like that, and letting them fertilize the fields. Same with the bigger animals, letting the sheep and goat like graze in the orchard and stuff. So kind of just getting more of a rotation in
Yeah,
place would be good. But
yeah,
yeah, we also acquired a lot of these bigger animals in like the end of the season, so they're not as used to the grazing yet just because everything's mostly dead now. So once
sure.
spring hits, I think we'll be in a better place to incorporate that.
Yeah. Well, they can take care of a lot of refuse, right? And like you said, bugs, and they can basically kind of groom your garden to a certain extent.
Mhm.
Yeah, but you have to put them in there at the right time, right? Or else they'll like dig everything up.
Right.
But yeah, like they'll eat the stuff that you don't want, hopefully, and like then create the fertilizer and
Hmm.
do some work for you, hopefully. And what about the dogs? You mentioned, I know you've got Guapo back there. He's sort of your indoor dog. Um, yeah, like what other dog and what's he doing?
We adopted this stray one-eyed dog that we call the warden, and he guards the animals, his wards, if you will.
Yeah.
It wasn't something we were really seeking out, but he's more or less the best behaved animal we have, and he was from the first day. So
Yeah. That's a great that's a great use for a dog, and like to give them a job, and basically, I think they're happier that way, and you shouldn't have to worry about any predators while that dog's out there.
He does a good job. Anytime we hear him barking, he is like barking at either some stray cat or dog that's around. So, and
Hmm.
he's a fearsome looking dog. So I
Hmm.
think he does a good job in that regard. And he gets along with the livestock just fine. So specifically the chickens and ducks.
That's excellent. Yeah, it's really cool the way animals can work together if you find the right ones.
and I would just add to finish asking your question from a couple of questions ago. the wider vision of what we're trying to do, it's pretty standard, like ecology 101 and like organic farming 101, which is we're just managing flows of nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not fully self-sufficient. We're buying feed for the animals, but those animals are pooping, and then that's mixing in with their bedding. And then we haven't done a lot of that since this is year one. But when we clean out their bedding and put new bedding in, then that poop and that old bedding is going to go into compost. And then after that compost sits for a while and digests, that's going to go into a field or into an orchard. And that's going to create food ideally for humans, but the animals will get a certain amount of the things that go bad or
Mm-hmm.
so it's pretty, to me, I'm realizing other people don't understand this when they come around, even though to me it's like the core of everything we're doing and it's pretty obvious. But this is how detached from these things we are, that we think it's normal to have these kind of sterile environments that we live in. And so we want nice lawns, and we just want when we need fertility on it, we just get it out of a bag manufactured in a petrochemical plant. Whereas what we're trying to do in a similar way, but a more holistic way, is convert feed into poop / fertility,
Mm-hmm.
and get eggs and meat out of the deal as well.
Right. For very little additional outside source like money or, I mean, ideally you get to a point where you don't even have to have the feed, right?
Ideally, but I mean, we are far, far from being able to grow feed for the animals.
Right. Sure.
And if we ever got there, the average person who would visit us would be like, why aren't you giving that food to people?
Well, farmers know the answer to that, but yeah, like I appreciate you explaining that for people. I agree with you. People need to have that explained to them because they haven't seen those kinds of cycles. And we're so used to everything being kind of clean and packaged and everything that, to say that fertility and in fact your food comes from more or less poop is, like a thought that maybe folks haven't exactly had. So I think that's actually really useful. Yeah. Um, so I know, I wanted to ask you about how biochar fits into this. I know we've talked about this before, but in the meantime, I feel like you've kind of ramped that part up too. So why do you go around and collect wood off your property and elsewhere and burn it in a big pit to make biochar? And just tell people what that is.
I mean, we gather the brush here because it's about kind of cleaning up the area. That right now we have too many overgrown, poorly managed trees. And so we're selecting the trees that we want to do well and letting them continue to live, and then killing off the ones that are either half of them are already dead, and then the other half ones that we don't want. And then historically, again, we left the greenhouse job, which meant we also left a landscaping job. But historically, this started because you make way more money landscaping than you do farming in general. I do. I put that article in the Slack about that new book. I think it's called The Lies of the Land. But there was a write-up in the New Yorker where they had a line about how, we have this idea of how farming was and how it should be. But the fact of the matter is, like, throughout all of human history, a better emblem of people that work on the land is not like a pitchfork, but it's a leaf blower.
Mm.
Because I would say, influenced by the Frankfurt School or whatever, that the reason that's the case is because landscaping is a subset of the real estate racket. And there's more money in that than there is in farming. And this is directly connected with people being unaware that their food comes from poop, even though all their food comes turns into poop. So you would think maybe people would draw this connection, but we don't, because we're trapped in like capitalism. And
Yeah.
that's why I wanted to be an urban farmer. For several years, I was more of a landscaper,
Mhm.
and the biochar came out of how do I economically and ecologically take care of that brush? Because what most people do is just pay to dump it somewhere, and hopefully it gets composted. But it's amazing the amount of brush that doesn't get composted because, again, we don't care. We don't understand that wood too is part of an ecological loop that we have to maintain if we're responsible, and of course we're not. Um, So it's been our small attempt to responsibly manage that brush.
Mhm.
And again, it's also an input into the rest of our agriculture here because we take that biochar and we put it where all the animals are living, where it gets pooped on, where it absorbs that nutrition. Um, and then it goes again, it with their poop and with the rest of the bedding will go into the compost and then into the rest of the field.
Mhm. It sort of accomplishes a little bit of carbon sequestration, right?
Yeah, so basically this is a very convoluted like scientific reality, but my gloss on it is when you burn wood and turn it into charcoal, roughly half of that carbon that isn't going up into the atmosphere is getting more or less mummified, and it will live in the soil longer than if you just like shredded the wood and put it straight in the soil
Okay.
because of complex biological or chemical processes that are happening with the wood and the fire and the oxygen or the lack of oxygen.
Hmm. So that slow burn kind of creates a different kind of wood charcoal, basically, and that,
Yes, through a
yeah,
process called pyrolysis, which
yeah,
has to do with when you're burning things in an oxygen deprived environment.
gotcha. Okay.
So again, it's like exactly like with the poop. Well, not exactly analogous to with the poop. We're managing cycles of fertility.
Hmm.
In this case, carbon, and in the case of our animal poop, primarily nitrogen. And we're trying to sequester that into what we're doing instead of taking it somewhere else for somebody to deal with.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And that's a good model for, I guess, any local area to kind of try to keep as much of their waste in their area and turn it into not waste, but something they can use. And so that's a good demonstration of that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like to remind people that, prior to like human beings doing a lot of management or apart from our management, the rest of the world works like this already, right? So like everything in nature poops and rots. It's pooping all over the place. Birds are flying. What do you think they're doing? They're pooping. They're raining down tons of poop and pee all over everything. And then they're dying and they're rotting. Where do people think they go? So everything's rotting, dying, pooping, and so on all over the planet. And it's been doing that forever.
It's the
And this
circle of
is
life and it moves us all.
there you go. And and then it creates soil. Now it does it a lot slower because it's laying there, on the surface and it just sort of happens slowly, but that's how our dirt is made, you know. Unlike the dirt that you buy in Home Depot that you can't even grow anything in, by the way. I bought a bag of dirt because I was kind of desperate to like grow something inside. And I waited too long and I got this dirt that said it was raised bed dirt. And I planted your starts in them, the little lettuce starts. Guess what? They did not grow. They stayed pristinely the way they were for a month and a half. I'm not kidding. There was no growth, but they stayed alive. And I thought, what did they do to this? Did they put some sort of like non-growth or growth retardant in the soil? I don't know what it is, but
Probably
anyway.
not. I mean, it's you never know where these things come from. I assume a lot of it comes from when they're clearing land and slopes for developments and stuff. So in these cases, what was the soil management practices? And
Yeah.
if it hasn't been regeneratively farmed and it's been abused, then it's dead soil.
Hmm.
A lot of the
It's,
nutrients have seeped out. There isn't a lot of biological activity.
yeah. Or it's even got chemicals in it, like herbicides,
Sure,
pesticides, stuff that could
sure.
interfere. So not much point in doing that, folks. I mean, that's a big market, the market for soil. And I would say probably 75% of the time I've done that, it has failed. So like it's not good stuff. But but the real deal is, kind of like full of bacteria, mold, all kinds of stuff that actually is necessary to break things down. Um, okay, well, I mean, this is good to know. So you're doing the kind of practices that you want to do, and I think it sounds like you're trying to homestead rather than like produce a lot of food to sell or anything like that. Um, so, like, I wanted to ask you what has changed since you renamed your farm and started to practice as the Catholic worker farm. How's that changed things for you?
I would say it hasn't really. I would
Yeah.
say we were already basically a Catholic worker farm,
Okay.
and uh, we've gotten some emails and I guess some attention from other Catholic workers or interested people.
Yeah. What is it? He was looking on the Catholic Worker website the other day, and our farm, if you look it up, says like popular. So I guess I don't know what that means. It
Oh.
could be like at least 10 people saw it. I don't know.
Well, they're just
But
yeah. If we're popular, I can't imagine what it's like to be unpopular.
Jeez. You sound like Woody Allen, wasn't it? Like I wouldn't want to join a club that would have me as a member.
I think that was Groucho Marx, actually.
Oh, well, I think Woody Allen might have stolen it then, but it's a good
Okay.
line.
that's
Yeah,
funny. Oh
classic.
my gosh. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't know. Yeah, with the name, I mean, if anything, maybe like some word around like the diocese in terms of like our Catholic focus is like we've at least tried to be more involved in different like committees for with like the Life and Justice Department, and we're kind of on this in this group to or what's his name? Adam.
Right. Yeah, Adam, he's like part of the Common Core,
Yeah.
or Common Home Core,
Yeah.
which is some program out of Loyola University to basically make like Laudato Si activists out of people and kind of
Ah,
organize parishes to um,
Have green teams and
and
other
and
incentives.
and get the diocese to go like carbon neutral or net zero, which in their telling, from what I can tell, it's basically these kind of technocratic schemes to get you to just invest in different energy programs,
hmm.
which is fine as far as it goes, because that already seems utopian from what we're seeing, even though you're literally just talking about somewhat shifting around how you do money. Um, but yeah, so we've been interested in that. And I guess for me, it's helped me screw my head around the idea that perhaps the rest of my life I'm just going to be making the it should be obvious argument that Catholics should care about the environment and should understand the direct connection between how we live our lives and how the environment is treated.
Mhm.
And I kind of resent that because well, I'm processing my melancholic trauma over the fact that this should be obvious.
Uh,
But in fact, maybe it's just going to be my life work to because we have to escape this riptide of like Republican and Democrat propaganda in various ways.
but
That obscures those simple facts. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say you have to do whatever is kind of necessary given the circumstances. Um, it seemed to me like you've got two kinds of people. You've got people who really don't know, which is probably a lot of people, believe it or not. I think it's a lot of people. I encounter people all the time that try to, and we need to keep working on this, but they try to even read what's on our website, like our mission statement, and they don't even know what we're talking about. And then I get like feedback like, I'd read it, but it's too hard or something like that. Or it's, I don't understand the concepts and I keep having to look stuff up. And of course, my response is good. I'm glad you're looking stuff up. That's really good. Keep looking stuff up. And then the other people I think do know deep down, but they're doing their best to like stay in denial about it, right? So between those two
Because
is
the implications are too dire.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I think so. And so those are in some ways they're the more stubborn because I think if you the first set, if you can kind of like find a language to speak to them where it's actually clear and within their wheelhouse enough, you can make some headway. And the second set is like more psychologically opposed, obviously. So like they resist, you know. And I think a lot of like Republicans and Democrats that you mentioned, the more sophisticated party people are like that, you know? I don't
Yeah.
know what to do with that. Um, yeah, I've got my own ideas, like shaming people and stuff like that.
Which I tend to roll my eyes at because, like, insofar, one, I don't think it's healthy for you, and then two, I don't even think it
Ah,
usually elicits what you want.
really? Why is it not healthy for me? I feel good.
Yeah, well, and I guess I won't yuck your yum, as they say.
Okay. I don't know. Like of all the tactics I've tried, that one does get some traction sometimes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
some traction sometimes.
Well, I would love it if the Laudato Si folks would support the Catholic Worker Farm, with either labor or, sort of like, in other words, I'm aware of the Laudato Si action plan and all that too. And it seems to me that if in a local area you find a Catholic worker farm that's trying to do ecologically responsible practices, that would be the type of farm you'd reach out to and incorporate and try to help. And so I'm wanting to see that, you know. So you're saying they are aware of the JP2 farm.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
so.
Yeah,
okay.
or at least the small amount of people that care about this, um, a portion of them
Mhm.
do know about us.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens, right? Because it would seem like a no-brainer that the two should be connected.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I did want to circle back to the farm real quick, just because I think a good way to solidify how like the last 6 months have gone too, in terms of one, working on the house next door that Lori's helping us out a lot with of getting that set up for a future like internship or Catholic worker stay or woofer, whatever.
Yeah.
We've been putting a lot of energy on that. And I think with that has come like we spent a lot of time like trying to figure out like how do we, I don't know, again, like what are we doing with the farm? How are we making this sustainable? We can't just market gardens, so what are we doing? And I think a lot of that has looked like we have been thinking about doing like some kind of like extended stay basically or worker scholar program at the farm that's also associated with the Morin Academy. Um, as well as we've talked a lot about does our role at like JP2 to some degree less so be like come here and farm, and also just like our responsibility within like the diocese could maybe be like exposing parishes to local food programs basically. And if our job is to some degree rolling up on different parishes and being like, have you heard of the food hub or like these other big farms? Let me tell you how probably easy it is to buy bulk food and have like your own parish CSA or something. Like these are our ideas where like it can't be that hard, but it is. So if we can be like people that, I don't know,
Can bridge the gap.
can bridge that gap, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's stuff we talk a lot about. And then if that's somehow associated with the JP2 or some other program, I don't know. that's just been on our mind a lot with like where this is all going, I guess, which is why that felt relevant for me to say. Hopefully that
Oh.
makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I love that vision for the house next door, with connected with the Morin Academy, a sort of worker scholar in residence where, that person stays for a while and long enough for us to get to know them well and to have a lot of good conversations and for them to learn about how to do the farming too. And then I also love that idea of kind of being that go-between, sort of an educator in a way, right? But an educator with like their feet in the actual practice, which is always, I think, a powerful thing. Going and saying, hey, we believe these things as Catholics. Here's how you can start to live those things, and giving them very concrete information about the local Kansas City area so that they can take those steps. I think those are great ideas. Yeah.
Yeah. And part of it, I've been sitting here toying with, her sister got us an egg stamp for Christmas. And then I realized we could do like custom egg stamps. So I ordered, I'll hold them up to the camera because I think it relates. So we have like the JP2 CW farm.
This will be a good thumbnail too.
Yeah.
I love it.
And then there's the eggs where it says Veritatis Splendor. And I think where this relates to what she was saying is Veritatis Splendor was an encyclical JP2 wrote on like moral theology. But it starts out by saying the splendor of truth, and it's the title of the encyclical. Something like the splendor of truth shines forth in all the works of the Creator. And then it goes on, and especially in humanity, da 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 da. But to me, this is where, again, where I was talking about, I resent that like this argument even has to be made. JP2 is saying, do you take that seriously, that the splendor of truth shines forth in all of the things that exist? And all of us, even the devout Catholics, are in deep denial about that. Because if truth is embedded or is being exuded by something like a chicken, now admittedly like a relative or like an analogous quote unquote kind, I think that's a good Thomistic term. All these things are analogous, but fundamentally, we don't view chickens as having a truth. We view them as like machines to fill with grain so that we can get cheap eggs. That's most of our engagement with chickens. And in our own small way, we're trying to engage with the truth of chickens.
Right. Or would it be like safe to say the telos or the end of a chicken?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I relate to that, is that in everything that's created, there's a telos or an end or a goal, right? And a sort of flourishing.
Yeah. Or a nature.
Yes,
Right.
right. A nature. And so we're supposed to treat it according to its nature or virtue or excellence or whatever, and this is something the church has been teaching forever, I think.
Right. And the problem is, if you're the kind of nerd that would even care about this discussion or are probably listening to this talk, it's so easy to get bogged down in the minutia of, how much is too much of treating chickens well and this or that. But at the end of the day, to my mind, these are these kind of abstruse questions that kind of don't matter if what we're avoiding is like, am I in what I do and how I eat, helping concrete chickens somewhere live better or worse lives according to their nature?
And I think for a lot of people, where they stall is, well, okay, I can be very nice to chickens, but then what's in it for me? And like, I think for what we need to say is what's in it for you is, long before there was a money economy, doing that yielded the food you needed, yielded, literally your health. So, there's a reason why we should steward these things well. And the money economy has sort of distorted our perception of that. But God made the world to work without money. He made, all of nature to work without money. And he made a situation where people could put food on their plates and a roof over their heads without money, actually. I don't know, like sounds radical, but it was the case, right?
For
And
most of history.
yeah, right.
Yep.
It's set up that way. So, but if we treat them just like machines, then we break that cycle where they provide and we provide to them, and vice versa.
Right. And again, to link it up with what we were talking about at the beginning, it's not just a question of chicken welfare. It's a question of where is their poop going as well. Like that's part of their nature. Like it's part of where it's so hard for people to understand this is it's not merely an animal welfare sentimental question. It is it's a practical question too about what is their nutritional quality, what is the nutritional quality of their eggs that they're eating, what is the nutritional quality of their poop, and where is that poop going to further more nutritional effects in the environment. And that is the splendor of truth that we are in deep denial of because we're all implicated in the commodifying of everything that exists.
Yeah, it would seem so. It's impossible to extricate yourself totally from that in our environment. But even to be able to first like see that that is not the way things have always been or are supposed to be, but what we do now, that right there is sort of moment of stepping back and sort of, whoa, wait a minute. Actually, what we do is kind of weird. It really is.
It's like perverse,
Yeah.
toxic. Yeah.
Right. In all kinds of ways.
But in a world where that's normal, this type of complaining is way more easily viewed as toxic and problematic and lame and whatever.
Yeah. Right. And then it's caricatured as animal rights wackos, right? When I mean that language of rights.
Or earth worshippers or animism or yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's this whole tangled web. And then all of these stupid discussions can be ways to avoid asking about what is my relationship to the soil and to chickens. Yeah.
Well, our class from not too long ago on Wendell Berry's The Unsettling of America, I might mention that because if people want to know more about kind of how the earth was set up to actually yield fruitfulness, there's nobody better to turn to than Wendell Berry. And Spencer and I did a 4-part series on that. You can get that in our store or just sign up as a patron for the Morin Academy's Patreon, and you can get access to everything that we have done. It's a good way to educate yourself about these things in a friendly environment. Yeah, well, like it's frustrating when you're trying to do the right thing, but people don't really recognize it or they think ill of you actually because you're trying. It's hard. Well, why do you guys, I mean, at your core, like, why do you guys do it? Because you've made quite a commitment. And it is hard. So like, if you had to tell people just the number one reason that motivates you.
I think again, like at the risk of sounding schmaltzy, it's love, and like love, not just like as a sentimental feeling, but a recognition of, well, first it was an attempt to learn how the world works and what is real and what is true, and then to try and live in accord with that. And that's not to say it's the only way to do it, but it's sure better than what most people are doing. And also, it wouldn't be as hard to do it if even a committed substantial minority of people were also doing this with us.
Yeah, it would be easier and probably even more fun.
Yeah. And I don't mean just like directly on our block, but if it wasn't so hard to make the pitch to sell these eggs, as one example. So I guess that's what I mean by love.
Yeah, definitely. And just a simple definition of like to will the good of another, to will the good of creation. That takes like a lot of time and responsibility and care and attention to like really make that happen. But there is a sense of, I mean, we're tired after most days of doing this kind of stuff, but it is like gratifying and rewarding. And I don't know, feels like we're trying to do our part and doing the best we can to take care of the things around us. And to feel like we have like a responsibility too, I guess, is I think a big part of that.
Mhm. Are you at some level happy, would you say? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, there's different, gradations or like different types of happiness. And we spend a lot of time like pointing out the obstacles and the problems and stuff. And yet people wouldn't do these things if it didn't ultimately satisfy them somehow, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I would say I've come to feel more like at peace and content that even if I have regrets that things haven't worked out so far in ways that I would like them to have, at least I've tried.
mhm.
And the fact that we are making genuine progress in several areas is in its own way pretty gratifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the integration of the Morin Academy and the farm's mission and stuff, I think we can do that in a variety of ways, and that's a cool development.
Mhm.
And some of the people that we've met on the Morin Academy side have really been it's been rewarding to me to meet people who are genuinely seeking knowledge and good people and from all kinds of walks of life. It's really been very nice. So yeah, I mean, we only have one life. I mean, that's what people need to keep in mind when they think about, oh, it's not practical, I could do some other things. But as far as we know, like unless we're wrong, but like, and we could be wrong, but we probably just have one life, and it's about anywhere between 70 and 100 years, and that's what you've got before you go on, and so probably it actually makes sense to do as much of what you think is right and that will ultimately make you satisfied with your life when you look back at it and say, here's what I did, you know? That probably actually makes rational sense if you think about it that way. Um, but we tend to talk ourselves into, like sort of like the old, Soviet Union, the 5-year plan, the 1-year plan, the 2-year plan, the 5-year plan, but we don't think about like the overall life trajectory very often until we get to the other end sometimes. And then people start thinking about what are they going to say about me? But then it's a little late if you haven't done things that you wanted to do in the meantime.
It's that old line about we grow too soon old and too late smart.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we got to try to jumpstart that a little bit. And I'm really encouraged that at least a few people are trying to do that with us. Like in our Communio reading group, there's some really good people there that are popping in actually to your kitchen table every every month and trying to like um, sort of jumpstart their knowledge. So um okay. Anything else on the farm front before we move on to maybe the bigger picture of the Kansas City area?
Did have one more thing, I think.
Okay.
In terms of also like what our plans for collaborating more with like the Morin Academy, like cultivation side of things. I think we've talked and toyed around with the idea of doing some kind of like permaculture project, like on the farm and maybe like documenting that or something like a series throughout the year, whether that's like building berms and swales or some kind of like pond water catchment system. So if any of the people that have listened this far and are interested in that want to send us ideas of what they'd be interested in seeing, we've talked about trying to implement something like that on the farm, and that'd be a cool segment for us in the Morin Academy to collab on. So something to keep in mind.
It totally would, yeah. If they want to contact us, They could email morinacademy@gmail.com. Of course, if they're on Patreon, they can message us through there. And so at least those are a couple of ways.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like those ideas. I I think we need to do more of that, just kind of getting down to the brass tacks of how you do something and why, putting those two things together. Because a lot of times, those are separated. You can learn the technique, and we've done that with some of our classes where we're just teaching the technique, or you can talk about like, why should we do that and what does it mean and why don't more people do that, right? And so that kind of thing would definitely bring those two together and really explain to people why we might want to, whether it's, create hugelkultur or berms and swales, permaculture on your landscape. So I love it.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, well, what's going on in the larger Kansas City area on the food scene? And, because you guys are integrated into that, I know that. So, like, is there any new developments there?
I mean, the biggest, well, I don't know if it's the biggest thing. First, I would say we are like integrated into some degree, but we have a pretty small role. Yeah, we're members of the food hub, and we try and stay abreast of what's happening, but we're also pretty bogged down in, between running the farm and getting ready for our wedding in April. Um, you know, it's not like we're deeply connected. But I mean, something we've tracked, especially in the last few days, is there was another zoning hearing for basically the situation is some people say the biggest urban farm in the area, certainly one of the best. They've been having code trouble with the city um, over mainly petty issues, but one big issue with the question of like the future of their composting operation. And so we went to on Zoom, we went to the public hearing about their rezoning thing. And it was we were both sick and we were like listening to it for what, at least 3 or 4 hours?
It was like at least a 3 hour long hearing
Wow.
with like the board of zoning or some zoning board in Kansas City. Because yeah, this farm has like 4 zoning violations against it. And this farm is in a unique spot. It is like it's zoned residential agriculture, which is like unique to Kansas City nowadays. Like they got that zoned and created a zoning specifically like for that because it's still in a residential neighborhood, but it is agriculture.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's like a bigger composting site there. They're under other, again, like you said, petty violations. But
And they have a whole side business where people pay them to come and pick up their compost. So that's like a business in its own right.
Gotcha. So what were people wrangling about for 4 hours? I mean, what were these comment sessions like?
I mean, I've been describing it as like a whirlwind of stupidity from like every faction in the meeting, to my mind, like wasn't really. And when I say stupid, not just like not in some punk like, oh, everybody's dumb and I'm smart, but like the factions, be they like the pro farm position, the anti farm position, and then even and um the board, the zoning people, they all had their different agendas, and I feel like they weren't really connecting um to the other parties. So there was a lot of talking past each other. And so my read on the situation was that the zoning people were like, look, they're in violation of these things. And the question was, have they been brought into compliance on these things? Has a procedure to change things been undertaken? And the answer to both of those was no. So then the question was, are we going to kick the can down the road until they can either change their zoning and their systems or be brought into compliance on
these
There.
violations.
Yes, there.
And these are big violations. Like if they hypothetically were to come in the right with those, like it's gonna cost like at least 100K probably.
Yeah, and probably several
And
$100,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's not a light, like just fix these violations. It's like it will change like
Yeah.
the state of their farm to
But
do that.
But where I had trouble relating is like also they say that they spent $500,000 getting their farm set up for this composting operation.
Which they probably took out a loan to do that.
Right. And I don't want to be like, oh, just get another loan for several $100,000 more dollars. And that's like as if it's no big deal. But it's also, to me, it's part of the tragedy of like, unfortunately, this is what being a successful urban farm has to look like, right? That you expand and then you get all of these unintended problems
Right.
because you live in a society, and not just you live in a society with rules, but you live in a society with a bunch of deracinated, petty bourgeois, alienated neighbors. And of course, there's going to be issues.
I'm assuming that they thought they were in compliance, right? And
Yeah,
and do they dispute that they're out of compliance?
they do.
Oh yeah, that was like
Okay.
most of they had a lawyer represent them, and most of her talk was how the way they measured the cubic yards of the compost still like meant that they were in compliance of their like 1,500 cubic yards at a time. And like what was part of the stupidity of this meeting is like you had like the city staff being like, well, based on like this picture, and like they were mixing up like yards with volume with square footage of, so there's all these numbers thrown out and no one really knew how much compost they had, or like
Yeah, and
it was kind of absurd to listen to that part at least. So then most of the attorney speaking was like, this is why, like, this is how compost works. This is why they're still in compliance. And meanwhile, the board's like, we get how compost works, like, move on.
and then the pro farm people would still just keep coming back on, yeah, this is how this is how composting works, or just I support compost.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
so
yeah.
And so the pro, and then, a representative of like a pro farming nonprofit around here, got up and talked about, and again, I agree with, fundamentally, I'm on the pro farm side, but the argument was like, well, the city should change their codes. And it's like, sure, I'm open, sure. But also, it's like, is this the appropriate venue? This is like a lower court or something. And you're asking for like a more Supreme Court type of decision, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So they missed their opportunity for a compromise, I'm hearing.
Right.
Yeah, right. Or, any sort of resolution because they went into it with like political mode on all sides where they're
Right.
just.
And even,
Yeah.
even from like the neighbors that like originally filed like the complaints and like the zoning violations, is like their testimonies were also like emotionally charged too. So like from all angles, everyone was like, again, like Spencer said, just talking past each other. And I would argue bringing up like kind of irrelevant points to why they were all there today, which is why it was 3 hours long when it probably didn't need to be.
Sure. Yeah. When people get like that, there's no way anything's going to be resolved. It just makes things worse. It really does. Everybody's now in a more hardened position, no doubt, than they were before.
Mhm.
And everybody's still, and the decision was to kick the can down the road for 6 months.
Yeah.
And so nobody's happy. The neighbors from what I can tell, the position of the neighbors, and we can talk about like the racial line of this whole thing too. But the neighbors, from what I can tell, what they just want the compost situation like either fully shut down or dramatically scaled back.
And the traffic.
Yeah, which is all primarily connected with the compost.
Sure. Yeah.
Post. Yeah, maybe they're pissed off about the 100 people coming there once a week to
CSA.
their CSA. Yeah, so I mean, partly what they're looking at is probably building a road inside of their farm.
which is possible. It's just really expensive.
But like and then the pro farm people basically wanted the city to say, "Oh no, you're totally fine. We're going to leave you alone." And nobody was happy with the ruling.
Well, was there a ruling? There wasn't a ruling, right?
There was a kind of, yeah. So basically the board decided like you get a 6 months continuance, which they already were operating in a continuance. So this is their second continuance they've gotten. And then they just have to put in an application for like a development plan through the city to basically like change their zoning somehow or to create a plan of this is how we're gonna basically come in compliance with the zoning violations that we have. So,
Gotcha.
but where they're generous there is it doesn't take that long to put in an application. The part that takes longer is like getting that plan approved through all the different avenues in city council and everything. So
Mhm.
that's what takes a really long time, getting that through all the different boards
And the maddening thing is you're talking about tens of thousands of dollars
yes.
to pay professionals to come up with the plans and push them through the relevant governmental bodies.
Mhm.
And again, I totally understand why that's infuriating.
Right.
Because it's part of the wisdom of not trying to do these avant-garde things is because they just wanted to farm and show the world this could be done. And now it's like they're having to do yet another row with the city to let them continue to presumably barely make any money.
Yeah, I think this is a fairly common theme at a lower level than that. That's a big, big one. But like, I think a lot of local farmers, especially urban farmers, do tend to get kind of harassed by like whether it's the inspectors, the like the local officials, the neighbors. I mean, I've known urban or well, actually one was from another town, but like supplied Manhattan organic farmer who was harassed by the neighbors because they just didn't like organic stuff. And then there's another farmer here in town that was told their kitchen was in compliance with the city's health regulations, only to be told later that it wasn't and that they had to, move and, actually construct a full-blown commercial kitchen costing probably close to $100,000. Local officials get crosswise with local farmers a lot, I think.
Right.
Which
And these farmers are already on the edge.
Oh yeah. They're like, I mean, hands down one of the most hardcore farmers like in the metro area. And their work and their farm shows it.
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Right. But I always think about like I woofed with this farmer in Alabama, and he was talking about like the early anti-GMO activists, and I think it was specifically France, but about how some of them would go into fields of GMO crops and like in the middle of the night just cut a bunch of it down to basically just, vandalism to disincentivize that type of behavior.
Mm.
And I like noted to the farmer that like it seems like a lot of work to cut down like acres and acres of that, produce. And he's like, well, but you're not looking at it right because you don't have to. Basically, he said, you're looking at it like a totalitarian, like you have to just raise their field to the ground. But if their profit margins are only 5 or 10%, then if you just cut down 5 to 10%, then they just break even. And my point in connecting it to this is like when all of these urban farmers are so close to being on the edge, and then they encounter what to a normal outside person would be like, well, that's just the cost of doing business. Is like, but this isn't a normal business.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is this thing fueled mostly by our like idiosyncratic drives.
Right.
And yeah, I totally understand how it's an infuriating thing when you're trying to do the right thing and you are like de facto being persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bummer. And where we all too, where I feel like, I don't know, I'll just speak for like us, like compared to the rest of the community, like you want this farm to do well insofar as like if we're in a legal environment that penalizes them, it's also going to like penalize us one day. Slash in all sorts of ways already is in indirect ways.
Sure. And all of that functions to kind of reinforce the tendency of our entire economy to prefer large scale, big industrial farming. I mean, it's, knocking off the what little competition there is, basically. They can afford to deal with regulators.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can afford to come up to code with them. They can afford to get the credit to do that. They can also afford to like run the lobbyists to make the laws that allow them to do or not do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also I mean, to talk about like the political science of it, this is also the rational kernel of how so many small farmers turn into like political anti-governmental cranks, usually of a libertarian variety,
Sure.
because these people's lived experience of this stuff is of the government screwing them over.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And usually by incompetent bureaucrats, kind of like the ones it sounds like we saw. I mean, at least our lived experience of that hearing, the people weren't even sure that they were breaking the code with their compost.
Great.
And so it's like, and that was like the biggest issue, it seemed like.
Yes.
So yeah, if they come out of this Republicans, they're not totally crazy to have done so. Although, I mean, I doubt they will. But if they did, they would be entitled to, I think.
Oh, heck yeah. Like that's totally understandable. If you've had that kind of experience, you're not going to think well of government or regulations, right? Because they don't make any sense, or they're obviously put in place to persecute you and help out big guys. I'm sure it's the same with small business people. It's probably why most of the doctors and your local doctors are all Republicans too, for the same reason. They feel like they're on constant attack.
Yeah, and that's why Joel Salatin wrote "Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal," and that is foregrounded. And then if I ever get around to writing the spiritual sequel I want to, called "Everything I Want to Do Is Socially and Financially Untenable," that's a much more like abstract and hypothetical grievance with reality than, hey, there was this idiotic regulator telling me I could or couldn't do anything, and his word is gospel because he's backed up with the state's monopoly on violence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. That's basically the situation they're in. And I think a lot of other farmers have faced that. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this. People need to know about that. That's a constant theme. And I bet it's the same for small business generally, right? Farming in particular, because there's so many moving parts and so many ways that you can get crosswise with health officials and zoners, and there's lots of different like government levels that you can get crossways with. But even like restaurants would be another example, small mom and pop restaurants, downtown small business people. I mean, I think it's really, really hard now to like be a quote entrepreneur, right? We talk
Especially,
about it, but
yeah, especially in food. I feel like people maybe don't always realize how regulated our food system is, but it is so like as an example, the Kansas City Food Hub, which has been established for like almost a decade now, still can't even get produce into like local grocery stores because things are so regulated. So like, and it's a pretty official business, and I don't know. I think with food especially, there's just so many food safety, food regulations, like raw milk as an example, or things like that, where it is especially hard to sell your food.
yeah. And what has killed people with salmonella and like, oh, what was that? There's so many of these, like that one case a long time ago where people were eating burgers and like it killed a lot
Like
of people.
the E. coli stuff.
E. coli stuff, yeah. E. coli gets on these industrial farm lettuce bags. and it kills people or sickens people. It's not like this produce that they're producing is safe necessarily or safer. I mean, one of the nice things about having a more diversified local type of farming system would be that you'd have so many points from which to get your food that if one farm had a problem, it would only affect so many people, not thousands of people all over the country mysteriously. And then you have to spend days, if not weeks, tracking down the source, you know?
Right.
So I don't think, I think that's put in place to reinforce the status quo, not to keep people safe.
Yeah. Well, I once heard a K-State extension agent, um, and like God bless her for saying this. She admitted it was on the topic of like raw milk, but because there was going back and forth about, yes, there is a small chance, there will be bacteria that could make you probably more likely give you food poisoning than kill you in raw milk. It's far more likely that you'll get sick from raw milk than um, ultra processed, ultra homogenized, and pasteurized milk from a store. It is likelier that you will get sick. And her line was, well, here's the thing about us, like health inspectors, enforcers. We're not worried about nutrition. Yeah, because that was the other pushback. Yes, you're more likely to get sick, but there's also better bacteria that can help you digest it. It's probably more nutritionally dense because you haven't denatured the proteins, yada, yada, yada.
Hmm.
She said, here's the thing about health codes. We're not worried about nutrition. We're worried about safety. We're not asking what's healthy for you. We're asking what's going to get you sick today. And it's this nexus of that short-term technocratic logic with monopoly capital, where those the centralized bodies of agriculture and finance, they're the ones that can have the giant warehouses where, yeah, maybe once a decade they kill a few people because of an E. coli outbreak, but they're also the ones that the inspectors can come to their facility and they can say, we just spent 10 grand instituting these new antibacterial protocols. And then they get their stamp and then they get to go on down the road.
Right.
Compared to, a diverse local food system is not nearly as amenable to these technocratic impositions.
Generally speaking, people in America say, Republicans and Democrats say, that they believe more or less in the free market.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really believed in the free market, then you'd let, to a certain extent, the buyer beware, and in a local economy, if a farmer's putting out stuff that makes people sick or is patently not clean or whatever, people they're going to learn that and not spend their money there. And that's the way, I'm not necessarily a total free marketeer, obviously, but like it bothers me the sort of hypocrisy of folks, because that's a mechanism that really could help cut down on a certain amount of bad actors in businesses, and it's not allowed to act.
Sure. Well, and it's not, to me, where it's not a mystery is at the end of the day, a certain like substantial minority of Republicans care about free trade in the abstract, right? Free markets, but most of them at the end of the day are fine with capitalism and huge concentrations of wealth and power, and they don't care enough to change the system. And Democrats even more so.
Mm-hmm.
And they have even less objection to the idea of the government regulating people to keep everybody safe. And so this intersection of security and power, I mean, why change it?
Yeah, and they're not sensitive to the small business or small farmer much at all. I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
Neither party in this country really wants to solve these problems or really cares. I mean, and agriculture is one of those things that doesn't excite anybody, frankly. Like in this country, it's hard to get people to think about it. They take it for granted. They totally take for granted that they're always going to have a system that works. And so our legislators don't, it's technology is another one. They don't learn about it. They just sort of like waltz through the waltz through life without knowing a whole lot about it and just let things happen.
Right. Yeah. And if you want to be the kind of martyr that, I mean, I didn't set out to want to be a kind of martyr, but like to want to try and change things, like how, this urban farm is doing, you're really going out on a limb and shooting from the hip. And then you get I mean, maybe this is a good transition to the other, like the racial aspect of this
Oh
fight.
yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, basically the neighbors that were objecting, like filed all these reports, are all Black women. And there were even neighbors like on this, basically there's a farm behind like specifically like a neighborhood. And the neighborhood is maybe like 15 houses, or specifically this block is 15 houses. And the neighbors that were in objection were all Black women. And also the one objector on the board that was like in charge of this case was also a Black woman.
Hmm.
so, and it was another classic case of basically like progressive, presume mostly well, I'm stereotyping the supporters of the farm, but I got the distinct sense that most of them are fairly well-to-do, probably white people. And it was a literal, at least from what we could tell, a literal black and white split on the issue.
Interesting. So what did these women what did they say? What was their main objections? Like how would you
The smell from the compost site was a big objection.
Also disputed. Most neighbors claim it doesn't smell.
Right,
These
yeah.
ladies say it smells awful.
Yeah, because there's some neighbors who testified that said like they could never really smell anything, and then there's other neighbors who are like it reeks all the time. There's also the complaints were like the traffic that they get on their block to go to the farm, because you have to drive through like a residential street to get to the farm. And so there's like about 100 cars every week that are going to it. And then there's also like compost trucks every couple months and bigger trucks for supplies for their farm or something like that. And then what else? And then I don't know, other like petty violations of their like the retail that they're selling doesn't all come from the farm, which doesn't really affect the neighbors per se at all. But yeah, the two big ones for the neighbors were the compost smell and then the traffic violations. But it was these women that were, I don't know, upset by it, but other neighbors who also testified that were white were in support of her before. So.
Oh, that's really interesting. Is it how would you characterize the SES of that neighborhood? Is it like middle class, upper middle class, lower middle class?
I'd say probably lower middle class, but
Yeah, lower to mid.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This neighborhood was apparently, they mentioned it briefly, was like one of the first ways that I guess specifically made it accessible for like Black families to buy houses. So like I don't know totally the history of this neighborhood development, but that is historically it was for like Black families to start buying houses and everything.
Could it feel like could it feel like upper class white people are starting to take over the neighborhood and do things we don't want to do?
Probably.
Potentially, even though I guess I'd argue that the farmers are not like stereotypical upper class white people.
Sure.
Yeah, but their support base is like, your Karens from a nicer neighborhood that want to eat organically and locally.
Oh no.
Which is all well and good, it's not.
It's how it has to be. Like who do you think has the money?
Right.
And the education to know they should be spending their money this way?
Yeah, that is a irony of the situation is that the people who can afford it are generally, yeah, solidly middle to upper class.
Mhm.
Wow, well that is a wrinkle.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe, I mean, maybe diplomacy was warranted real early on in that situation. That I don't know if they tried or not, but like I suppose that's always a good lesson to learn is that diplomacy is always warranted, right? Like trying to like establish really good neighborly relations off the bat. But
And they would claim that they did. Like there was this chart that the attorney showed that was like all the houses on the block that were like in support of the current situation. And I do know that before they were like 10 years ago, whenever they were planning to like get this farm rezoned residential ag, they did have to like meet and get letters of support from all the neighbors on that block saying that they like support a farm being there.
oh,
Now that was pre like you can have a big composting facility as well. So that's like kind of where the issue has been.
Where they've kind of like scaled up.
Yes.
Seems like kind of gotten too big for their coding britches.
Yes.
gotcha. Well, not that I mean, of course, I'm always trying to solve problems, but one that kind of leapt to mind earlier is could they not maybe like just buy some cheap land a little bit further down the road and relocate some of their composting or like do a small amount there and then do a bigger amount in another location. But that might be cheaper than building a road and doing all these other things to accommodate the situation there. Oh boy,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
that's too bad. And then you get, like years and years of practice there, like you're doing on your farm. You've put literally years of labor into the development of that soil. And so moving is not that easy. It's not like, yeah, like you're leaving all that sunk labor behind, right? That it's not like you're just buying a new house and it's better than the old house. So, um,
Yeah.
but oh boy.
And these people already had to leave another farm for basically the same issues.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah,
Could have
I like
had.
listening to them. It was another case of like the neighbors that were against it were basically like, look, I want to have a nice middle class neighborhood where I don't have to um I get the traffic more than, well, again, it's contested. Does it smell? Does it not? I don't know. When I've been there, I haven't smelled anything.
Yeah. We would go every week and I mean it's a big compost site. It's bigger than a house, like a standard house.
And we would be, I mean, when you pick it up, you're right by it.
You're direct, yeah. You're maybe 100 feet away from it, if that.
Uh-huh.
But again, if ideally, I have Leland in my head right now because this kind of stuff grinds us gears. But like ideally, if you are composting correctly, it shouldn't smell that all that bad. Like yeah, when you're turning it, it'll surely it's putting off fumes. But ideally, if you're composting correctly, it should not have much of a smell or an odor.
Sure. Yeah, right.
And I totally buy that they're doing it right.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is which is why I mostly don't believe these ladies.
Mhm.
So I think it's a cultural divide. It sounds like a cultural and maybe a little bit of a felt class divide and stuff like that is really hard to deal with because it's not like you guys sensed it's not super factual. It's not like if, oh, we just determine whether they're violating
Because
codes or
it's not.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it makes diplomacy, the diplomacy that I would bet has probably already been attempted. It makes it, quite likely impossible. Well, and at the
Yeah.
end, kind of when the lead neighbor was kind of giving her summarizing speech, at the end of it, it did get like very emotional and to my mind, like more and more logically unhinged. Like when you're like, look at the damage to the roads that they're attributing to this truck, but who knows? Also, like Kansas City is off of roads,
Right.
so
And weather does a lot of damage.
Yeah, but-
more so than vehicles.
but that's an argument. you know, and in my memory, there was this moment where she's like, and yeah, they built this composting space, but they didn't like finish their plans. Like there were supposed to be covers over the compost. And I'm listening to this like, oh, maybe there were, you know, like maybe there's more compost blowing away because they're not covered by some sort of tarp or awning.
Hmm.
That's an argument. And then she immediately went to, and so since they're not covered, the rain or the snow, like the water gets all up in there. And I'm like,
Oh.
to me, this was the shift that she got like increasingly emotional and unhinged because I'm like, so what is the problem with some rain getting into a compost pile? And then she goes on and she's like, I'm going to read an interview from the farmers where she says, my dog, he'll get in there and he'll find little bits of cheese or brisket. And like she's just like her tone keeps rising the whole time while she's just describing all of the little bits of food waste that their dog eats. And it's like we've gone a long way from like the roads are damaged and it smells and I'm worried it's hurting my respiration to like to me it
To the fact that a pig has a hernia.
yeah that was
That's like a
another
problem.
she needed and again that split between like
Huh.
a bourgeois is do you treat animals like pets or do you treat an animal like well as soon as I fix that hernia I've lost money on this pig and I say this as someone who's like wrapped duct tape, not at our farm, but I've wrapped duct tape around a pig to like keep that hernia up for a
Sure.
month before it could go to the slaughterhouse.
I think it's kind of summed up by we didn't like work hard to get into this neighborhood so we could live next to a farm. I think that's what it really.
Or yeah, and then it's like, and so it sure seems like that's my read on their position. And then in the so you have the farmers wanting to stay and all of their bougie supporters. You have the black neighbors who would rather them go for whatever reasons they are. And then you have these discrete legal issues, and nobody really wants to deal with the legal issues because they're really just sort of leverage points to try and like exert their will over the other party. It was pretty gross on that level, I feel like. And then it's made worse, like from the pro to me, the worst moment of the pro farm side is this woman got up. I don't even think she was supposed to
She
talk,
probably wasn't supposed to.
but she was like, I used to live in the plaza. And I'm like, ooh, like I would not have said that. Even if that's true, you are not helping your case. I used to live in the plaza, and now I live in Midtown, and I've just learned so much from these farmers. I've learned about compost. I love it. Just the other day I was in Costco, and I'm like, ooh, like this is not helping. And she's like, and I saw on their landfill trash bin that it said like paper towels and napkins. And I know from these farmers now, because of their influence, that you can compost that. Why aren't they composting it? And it's like, dude, we are in this meeting where like this is really not appropriate, and you are like, you're not helping your side at this point.
You're just reinforcing why the black women are bad.
And to me, that part of
Right.
like, the core tragedy and where this isn't just like shit talking these people, I think, is I'm assuming none of these neighbors that are opposed to the farm are at least currently, and I don't know if they ever did, but are at least not currently buying the produce from like more or less the best farm in the area. Where are these people eating that? Are they going to like Hy-Vee or Price Chopper or like, is I cannot wrap my head around thinking that food is cleaner, quote unquote. And maybe it is clean, it's clean because it's full of the processing and the pasteurization. And so might not be better for us, but it's not going to kill us, and we feel better about that. I have tragedy of these neighbors are right next to like the premier urban farm, and instead of spending their money there, and I wonder to what extent there's resentment because they can't afford to buy it there, which is another problem. Instead of spending their money there, they're spending all their time and energy trying to at least chip away at that farm and its ability to thrive.
So
And to me, yeah.
I was just going to say a rather like obvious thing to try would have been to like just give the neighbors a CSA for free.
And for all we know, they did.
Very inexpensive, like goodwill compared to what they're dealing with now. I wonder if they would have even wanted it though, but like
Yeah, I don't know. I'm assuming the farmers are smarter than you and me. at figuring out how to work out with these people.
I wouldn't assume anything, but you know, that's just me. I don't assume things.
Well, you're
In the hard
assuming
way.
you're
Huh?
assuming right now that they haven't uh done
True,
everything
true.
they've
Yeah,
been more
okay.
or less.
Yeah. I wonder if they had. I wonder if they had. I know like some people would turn it down because they don't know what to do with it and they don't want to cook. But
Yep.
I don't know. That would have, I hope they tried that. And I mean, if I lived next to a farm and they gave me free food, I'd be kind of willing to look the other way occasionally. Hispanic culture is probably quite a bit more amenable to like gardening. You say some of them have chickens. I'm not surprised. They probably grow some of their own food in their backyards. Um, so they're familiar, you know, and kind of appreciate it. And it's just interesting to like think about the cultural differences here that really do matter, you know, like as far as how people are gonna respond to, in this case, urban local agriculture. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know it
Yeah.
matters here. Like I live in a sort of solid middle class, definitely not upper middle class type of neighborhood. It's got a lot of young families and stuff. There's people down the way that have chickens. People do whatever they want to with their property. Nobody says a thing because we're all trying to do something. It may not all be the same thing, but we want to we want to do what we want to with our property. And we also help each other out a little bit with food and stuff. Actually, it's kind of an unusual neighborhood. But if I move just a mile down the road to the upper class part of town, most of what I do with my yard, people would complain about.
Mhm.
We would be in trouble, you know,
All
with
right.
homeowners association or, you know, whatever. So, I mean, we choose to live here regardless. I wouldn't, even if I could afford it, I wouldn't live that way for that very reason. And I know a few other neighbors who've said the same. They wouldn't trade it. So where you where you live matters a great deal. And like people can walk into landmines like they did
All right.
without realizing.
Yeah, well, and I would really be interested to know what if you were like the average supporter of this farm in this call. Like if I'm stereotyping a lot of the pro food people, they very much tend to be like Democrat woke types. And so it's like, what do you do when you confront the fact that like everybody opposed you is a woman of color that you believe that you're in solidarity with, that you believe obviously should be on board with local food because they've heard all the arguments that you have. And what do you do when there being these kind of intransigent kind of like, I don't know, conservatives for lack of a better term?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess they're way past just trying to talk to them and ask them what's really bothering them. I mean, it's too late probably if there ever was an opportunity for that, but sounds like they might have to get some sort of arbitration, you know, ultimately, or a judge may have to decide because the political process probably won't even work because it's just become this shouting match now.
And I'm like, what are these board members thinking? You know? There were like 300 or 400 people in this call, mostly for this situation.
Yeah.
So like earlier in the day, the issue was like, does Walmart get to put a bigger sign out for their pickup? And then the whole meeting gets just sidelined by all of this insanity.
Yeah.
Well, and in these things, people get emails and calls. You need to come to this. You know, I've gotten those kind of emails, you know, everybody needs to turn out for this. And then it just becomes this huge show,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, because the strategy there is, well, we'll show the elected politicians how many we are. And
Yeah.
they, you know,
And that
not
was the
want
pro
to.
That was, yeah.
that was definitely the pro farm side of it is like the goal was to mob up, show how much support there was, and just have the city fully back down.
Mhm.
And uh, from this side of it, that was naive.
Yeah.
Although I don't know, for all we know, they could have had a way worse verdict if they didn't have people write hundreds of letters of support. And and show up. And even though they were told not to ride in the chat, everybody was constantly writing in the chat that I support
Yeah,
this farm.
maybe it worked to that extent. Um, the city says it supports these things. It also has bike lanes going on all over the place, which people get upset about. It probably needs to do more actual planning. If it wants urban farming, it wants that to be part of the city landscape, then it needs to do more active planning, to zone places where people can do this without worrying about harassment and getting, into clashes with the neighbors.
All right. Yeah. And this is a case of, I mean, I don't know. Maybe the city is still doing a good job. I mean, I'm inclined to think no, but who am I to say? Um, this is a case of these people literally got rezoned residential ag, um, and they still ran into these issues. And again, I would say there's minimal incentive for the city to do that because we're all committed to industrial ag.
Would seem so, yeah, right. It wants to have people kind of sacrifice their security and take a gamble so that they can look like they have a happening scene, right? In urban ag without actually putting anything much into it to like plan it and make it possible.
Yeah.
So,
And maybe this is a case, I mean, one of my takeaways, if there was a practical takeaway from this I got, it's that this farm um, more or less did what they needed to do to get like officially established and sanctioned by the city. And
mhm,
then they got too big and things got too real. And whether or not that's fair or not, obviously that's disputed. But from the standpoint of like social objectivity, they've got problems with the city and with neighbors. And that seems to be giving them actual legal financial problems. And
yeah,
it's a cute idea. I mean, this is, I mean, we talk about this a lot. Like you start out naive thinking I'm just going to do this and it'll be fine. And then it's like, well, what happens when you have some neighbors like screaming on Zoom?
right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, in that situation, I would be looking for ways to back down because even if they could like sort of win legally, the price is going to be so high. And if it's mainly the compost heap, then maybe they need to change that somehow because it's, the reality is the folks around there probably are not going to change their attitude. And so even if this somehow gets fixed, they're still going to be, it's not like they're then going to be satisfied and they're going to leave them alone, is what I'm saying. Right? Like as long as that's there, I think those ladies are going to have a problem with that and they'll be looking for problems. And so
Yeah.
sometimes you just can't win.
Right. And then their question is, do they just, then the deal is, then do you try and do what you want to do in some other way? Or do you just accept that, well, these are the constraints of the situation I'm in, and I guess I'll just stay within that box. And
Well, staying within the box has some virtues, right? Like, I mean, one of the things we've talked about over time is that maybe, the goal of endless growth is not even a good goal. I mean, the problem with a lot of businesses that start out with decent intentions can be that they grow so large that they become a little bit more like the rest of the world, So like, I don't know, staying within a certain bound is not horrible, but I don't know.
no, but when you imagine that you're on a crusade against industrial global ag,
It feels like it.
it, it's harder to adopt that posture. I would imagine.
Yeah.
So
Well, I wish them well. It's a good thing to do and we all know how difficult it is. So I hope that they can resolve it somehow and, I hope and pray that like those neighbors and them can actually have a real conversation. I know that's not likely, but I feel like that's about what it would take.
Mhm.
Because you start to look at the other person as though they're not really a human for you to like have a conversation with. They're just the enemy. And I think that sounds like where they're at now. Well, I know you guys have been feeling a little sick lately, so I hope you're doing better and continue to do better.
Oh, I
Take
guess
care of yourselves.
I hope people, if you have social media and that's your thing, follow the Morning Academy or the farm, and you can see pictures of our livestock and more of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put all that in the show notes and I'll maybe put something on the video itself, like so that people know where to follow you on Instagram in particular. And of course, the Morning Academy website and our Patreon and everything. So and of course, JP2 Catholic Worker Farm has a website, so you can go there and just check out a little bit more of what they're about. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. All right. Well, it's been good talking to you guys.
Yeah,
Likewise.
likewise.